தமிழரின் பிம்பம் உங்கள் டிவி.
Good afternoon, dear viewers. Happy New Year and welcome to CrossRoads on TVI. I'm your host, Parthy Kamdaval. While many of us were enjoying our holidays, spending time with family and friends, parts of Canada and our First Nations were mobilizing to demonstrate their grievances with Canada's relations with our First Nations people through what now has become the Idle No More movement. Also, Chief Theresa Spence, the chief of the Attawa-Piskat First Nation, has been on a hunger strike consisting of only fish broth since December 11th of last month. Her purpose is to draw public attention on First Nations issues and also to specifically highlight concerns about the federal government's Bill C-45. Opponents to this bill argue that it would remove First Nations rights such as self-governance and control of their lands. Prime Minister Stephen Harper agreed on Friday to meet with Chief Theresa Spence on January 11th and the Assembly of First Nations. Today we will examine what the Indigenous rights movement is, discuss the Chief Spence's concerns and the future of Canada's First Nations peoples. Joining us in this discussion are Steve De Silva, a settler ally, members from the Haudenosaunee First Nation, and thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Just so we can, tell our viewers your names.
Haudenosaunee, Skorori. Most people can call me Wes Elliott.
Wes, okay.
Segos a suegos kono da ne oya hungwe da ne garlewes ne gawahawa ne yongyok sa swigan da wat no gay no da nu ne oya te. Basically I says greetings and welcome to Turtle Islands, and my name is Big Wind, and I'm from the Cayuga Nation, Turtle Clan.
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. And to start off our discussion on today's show, I thought, many of our viewers are not, the most familiar with our history, this land's history, and perhaps to, bring us up to speed, if you can tell us some of the main points of European colonization and what's happened to the original people of this land.
One of the things that started when first contact was we had to have a way to deal with these settlers that were coming in. And one of the things that came up first of all was the two-row wampum belt. Mm-hmm. The two-row wampum belt was the way to establish on how we were to see each other. Mm-hmm. The two-row wampum came about as far as with other nations, which would have been the Dutch first. Uh-huh. That was about 1613.
Okay.
So we're looking at 400 years. This year is a 400-year celebration of the two-row wampum belt. Now the two-row wampum belt is symbolized by two white lines on a purple background. Mm-hmm. Each line symbolizes, one line symbolizes the canoe, and that's where we sit. That has all of our traditions, our culture, our language, our way of life, our constitution. Mm-hmm. That's where we are, is in the canoe. Mm-hmm. In the boat was the settlers. That's where they had all of their way of life, their religion, their rules, their regulations. Mm-hmm. And we were to travel down the river of life together. Mm-hmm. Us in our canoe and the settlers in their boat.
So when first contact was made, the understanding from the First Nations was that we've got to work together and travel on the same path together? Is that
work together, but separately, because neither one was to control the other's vessel. Mm-hmm. The canoe was not supposed to control the boat, and the boat was not to control the canoe. After the Dutch, then it went to the French. And then after the French, it went to the English, which is the crown. And after the crown, then it went over to the States. All of these different countries accepted the two-row. Now, that is the relationship that we have with them. Now, you have to look at also is the way that we deal with problems among each other. And again, it has a wampum belt. The friendship wampum belt is how we deal with when we have problems with each other. And basically, the friendship belt is symbolized by the silver covenant chain, where if I have a problem with you and there's a chain between us as friendship, trust, friendship, if I have a problem, I tug on it and you feel it.
That's right.
And so that means that I have a problem and we have to come together. Or if you tug on it, I know that you have a problem with something that we've done, and we come together and we discuss it. So those are the two most important belts, is the two-row wampum belt and the friendship wampum belt.
Steve, historically, what have been the major, I guess, turning points in terms of the Canadian state and for our First Nations people?
Yeah, I think we should put it into this historical context, which Wes has begun to touch upon. You know, when the warring European powers were beginning to colonize Turtle Island, you know, its proper name that the original peoples here called it, that we now know as Canada or North America. When they struck up these relationships and these treaties, the wampum belt, like the two-row wampum belt being one of them, this relationship of peace and coexistence and friendship, the European powers were always doing so with a perspective of trying to, they were doing so from a position of weakness in North America. They were warring with each other in 1613. There was the Dutch, there was the French, and there was the British, and they needed indigenous people here as allies, and also as the labor force of this series of trades that they were developing, such as the fur trade, which became most prominent throughout what is now known as Canada, but throughout much of Turtle Island or North America. And as settler colonialism expanded and intensified, particularly after what's called the American Revolution, where the American settlers broke off from Britain and began aggressively colonizing their western frontier, and with probably the greatest genocide in the history of humanity. And within British North America, you have the beginning of extensive colonization after 200 years ago now, after the War of 1812, when the British and the American colonizers and imperialists had settled some of their differences. There was an agreement that after they had settled that war, the British began to aggressively colonize what we now know as Quebec and Ontario.
On that note, because as we all know, last year we saw that our Canadian government spent millions of dollars celebrating the War of 1812. I think there's an important point to note about that war, because there was an agreement between some of the First Nations and the Canadian government, or the British government at that time, and that was reneged on in terms of being allied against the U.S.
What happened basically is the War of 1812. If you look at it historically, there were approximately 4,000 people from British soldiers that died. There are approximately 4,000 American soldiers that died. But as far as Haudenosaunee warriors, we had maybe about 12,000 die. If it was not for the Haudenosaunee, specifically the Mohawks, this part of Canada would be in the hands of the United States. We literally saved Canada. And once our usefulness in that war was over, that's when
What happened to that deal?
Well, the deal is, it's basically greed, power. Once they have to get the resources and they have to get the land, and they threw everything out and specifically started looking at the land, the resources, and then a few years later comes the Indian Act, and so the oppression that has been on us has been for a long time.
And the agreement between, say, the Crown at that time was that when the U.S. started to demoralize and annihilate our people in our original homelands, which is now around New York State, right? So a bunch of the people got together and made an agreement with the Crown, like where we have our homelands now along the Grand River, which is Schweigen, right? And so that agreement pertains us to 6 nautical miles on each side of that river, which now will be forever for the use of the Six Nations, right, or the Haudenosaunee. And so with this agreement, what they have done is they have developed and developed and developed and ignored their words and their promises to our peoples. And you know, this is why, and later on you'll find out why Idle Amore is so important, how it got started in that. And from that, that's the agreement was that is to preserve our inherent right as Haudenosaunee, not the rights that this colonial system portrays on us, right, which is Indian Act. We're talking about our inherent right, like our inherent right to hunt, you know, our inherent right to practice our way to honor, how should I say, God. Well, we say Sagoyadiso, right? Which is there's only one entity that looks after us, right? And so with all this together, once they start breaking their word and we get tired of being, you know, slapped around this and that and stepped on, you know, and this is why a lot of guys that run with me, we cannot call ourselves First Nations. First Nations is something man-made from that band council.
That's right.
You know, we are Haudenosaunee.
The correction. Right? So coming back to, post 1812, what were the major turning points?
Well, you have the aggressive colonization of what we now know as Ontario, Upper Canada at that point, Lower Canada, and Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee lands, the aggressive colonization of really everything along what is now the St. Lawrence, the Great Lakes, the 401, the 401 highway. You have all of these settlers pouring into the lands from Britain initially, and then later Scotland and Ireland, and then other European nations. And as settler colonialism is rapidly expanding, and the colonizers can, from a position of brute strength, they then begin to, you know, go back on those treaties and negotiations that they had made, like the Haldimand Tract, which Wes and Bigwin were just talking about, you know, allocated, you know, in those agreements with the British, the Haldimand Tract consisted of nearly 1 million acres. You know, there were Algonquin, Anishinaabe lands as well that were aggressively colonized. And we get the implementation of the Indian Act from the mid-19th century, which then imposes a colonial form of government, which I guess we're going to talk about later, which is the band council system, which completely ignores the, you know, what we can call democracies, or we can call political systems that people already had, that the original peoples already had in place, completely ignores that, imposes the Indian Act, then come the residential schools, and slowly, you know, people...
I feel like our viewers need more information on the residential schools, because it was so recent, so fresh, and like incredible impact on people's lives. Can you elaborate on the residential schools? What?
I mean, I'm sure others would probably be able to elaborate best, but just to put things into a chronological order, you get the residential schools beginning from the mid to late 19th century, and they go all the way up to the 1980s and become increasingly aggressive and violent, and you know, the types of things that happen in those schools get worse and worse as, I guess, the colonial government feels that they can you know, they can do this with greater impunity, because there's not the same consequences as there would have been when the native allies were in a position of military and cultural and all the other forms of superiority in relation to their relationship in the land and the integrity of their nations. You know, just to quickly run through this chronology for the sake of our listeners, so we can put things into perspective of what's happening right now with Idle No More. You got 100 years of residential schools. You have the, you know, when the residential school process is coming to a close, you have the what is called the 60s scoop, where a lot of Native children are stolen from their parents and families from the 1960s onwards and thrown into the homes of white families. And then, you know, from the 1980s onwards, you have this development of the Canada's prison industrial complex, of which I believe about 25% of the prison population is Indigenous people, is original peoples in Canadian jails. And all of these mechanisms have together worked to destroy, or at least try to destroy, the original nations that were here and are continuing to be here. And we see that expressed in Idle No More.
One of the things that happened from residential schools that your viewers should understand a little bit is that when they went in, our children, these are children that went into the residential schools. The government had our children go into the residential schools to take the native out of us. They were beaten if they spoke their language. Their hair was all cut off. There was a lot of abuse sexual abuse. There was people that were killed, people that were murdered. We lost thousands and thousands of children within the residential schools. And this was all done by the government with their intent is to make us all Canadians and to take our culture, our language, our history, everything away from us. That was their intent.
Moving into the what prompted Idle No More, and from what we understand is a lot of it is to do with the treaty rights. So what is the status of the treaty obligations and status of between the First Nations? Or
well, I can talk from a Haudenosaunee standpoint. We had a situation back in 2006 in Caledonia where we took over a development. And with that development, there was a lot of problems. It hit world news. But negotiations started out of that between Canada, Ontario, and the Haudenosaunee people. I was part of those negotiations for over 4 years. And at the very last negotiation meeting, we had asked the Canada for their written version, or their understanding, should I say, of the two-row wampum belt. And they gave it to us on that day, and it was ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous. They had no knowledge, they stated on paper, no knowledge of the two-row wampum before the 1850s, which was an absolute lie since it came about in 1613. Also, too, is that they wanted a new treaty between us and Canada, with us underneath Canada. See, the two-row wampum belt, or two-row wampum treaty, has us as equals, as allies and as equals. And Canada does not want to recognize that because they don't want to recognize us as equals.
what the previous treaty, when was that arranged and deliberated upon?
The two-row?
Yeah.
With the Crown?
Yeah.
With the Crown, it would have been in the late 1600s.
Yeah, around the 1600s
Okay.
or so.
And has that been recognized up until recently?
Well, it depends how you say recognize.
Yeah.
Up in like in Toronto, right, where they take their bars and everything, the two-row sits up on there. But yet they still ignore that and treat us with injustice in the court system. But this is what we're trying to say about our inherent rights, because our inherent rights stem from that agreement as well, right? And so it's hard to explain when we have our rights here and we go against the colonialism people, right? So if we go ahead and migrate into this world that's around us now, right? So that perception is lost, because now they want to, you know, like what they did, put us through the residential school, involve us in their wars and like that, and eliminate us how much as they can right now, right?
And how did the Caledonia dispute resolve itself?
It hasn't. Let me correct that.
Yeah.
Caledonia sits on our homelands, which is Ashwegan, right? So the proper name is Gunestado, right? Or Gunestado, whichever word that you want to say, right? And it has not resolved itself because it's still within the 6 nautical miles, right? And when they were asked to prove the fact that they actually kind of bought the land, because we know they cannot buy that land, because our law says that if you are Six Nations, you cannot sell land because you do not own that land. That land belongs to the coming faces, and the women are the title holders of that land. So therefore, how can I sell you something I don't own, right? So once they get that conception in their head, we can move forward, right?
Another, if I may interject here, another idea that's happened with Gunestado or Caledonia is that in our ways, it's been resolved. But we have what's called a Haudenosaunee land registry, our own Haudenosaunee native land registry, and we have registered that land under our Haudenosaunee land registry. So in our minds, in our ways, it's all over. It's done. It's ours.
Okay.
And that's it.
All right. It's time for a quick break, dear viewers. Please join us back, and please share your thoughts and your questions at 416-623-8100. Welcome back, dear viewers. Today on Crossroads, we're discussing the Idle No More movement and the history of our Indigenous people and the struggle they face and what the current situation that's being faced by them. If you'd like to ask any questions or share your thoughts, please call us at 416-623-8100. Joining us now in set is Gubonse. And Gubonse, I'd like you to introduce yourself.
Anim Bojo, Gibonse Tishnikas, Mekwadorum, Shkak Mekwedonjba. That means my name is Red-tailed Hawk. I am from the Bear Clan, and I identify myself as coming from Mother Earth. I could also probably tie in that I come from Creator as well, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
As we all are. Right? It's important to make that point. So we've in our previous segment we discussed some of the important historical context of how we are where we are right now as inhabitants of this land. I think on a lot of people's minds is Idle No More and also Chief Teresa Spence and her hunger strike. Perhaps you can perhaps tell our audience what prompted the Idle No More movement.
From my understanding, the Idle No More movement started from 4 women in Saskatchewan, and it was in direct response to the legislation of Bill C-45, and that's what my understanding is. So like this omnibus bill that Bill C-45 is a part of, it encompasses like so much legislation that you have to be a lawyer to understand everything. And what is in it is it's structured to eliminate our treaty rights. So like it's to phase us out, basically, is what it is. They've tried the residential schools, they've tried to outright kill us, they've tried all these different methods, and now it's a paper policy method to eliminate us from the lands so that they could have direct access to it, right? And that's basically what I understand Bill C-45 as.
And one of the things, as I understand it, is that they're taking away. One of the changes is that if a First Nation wants to do something with their lands, lease their lands to a company. I think one example is De Beers in Northern Ontario leases some First Nations land to do mining, and in turn they pay the First Nations. But prior to Bill C-45, all the eligible members who could vote have to approve any sort of deal, from what I understand. What Bill C-45 does, it says whoever shows up, which could be as many as 4 or 5 people, in order to do something that has incredible implications for the community, right? So on the flip side is what proponents, those who are supporting the bill, are saying that some chiefs have argued for these changes to make what they call streamlining the process. So what would take years to accomplish in terms of leasing land to a company, you can do them in a shorter time. Is that a good or a bad thing?
First of all, I need to just correct you a little bit. These are not chiefs that we're referring to. They are elected chiefs. They are part of the Indian Act, and as part of the Indian Act, what they're doing is Indian Act obedience, because of the Indian Act, and was enforced upon so many people that they have elected chiefs. They're not chiefs. Traditional chiefs are hereditary chiefs, and there's very few of them. At Six Nations, we have all of our chiefs are traditional chiefs, and so they are not elected chiefs. You have to have that distinction between chiefs, because the Chief Spence, she's an elected chief. Okay, there is a fine distinction between elected chiefs and traditional chiefs.
And with the Idle No More, like how it really got started is what you would say a medicine man or a holy man or whatever like that, right? Yeah. And so what I was fed up with the way the Canadian government and American governments just ignore us, and we were getting nowhere, especially after with the 1990 at Gunnasadagi, right? And then another one at Gunnasadaro, right? And so I had to journey into the spirit world to gain the attention of the higher powers and say, look, we're being abused here like this, and what can we do? And so after that, then as a matter of fact, a lot of the people from Oswego when I was telling them of the Idle No More movement and what it is about. What it's really about is our inherent rights. Like here, we're Haudenosaunee, and my friend here, he's traditional, he's Three Fires that we have also agreements and treaties with prior to the invasion of our lands here too, right? So what this is really is about is coming back to within what they call the Ganyaria Sara Ogowa, that great law of peace, so we all could live in harmony amongst the earth. But first we need to get our inherent rights recognized, to whereas where they're saying with this bank account system, our rights, like for instance, the taxes. According to our treaties, we are totally exempt from any of their taxes, but yet the people shall be entitled to any monies that they shall offer from that tax money, right? And now that's why when the GST come out and I didn't pay that, and I used to have like 20, 30 cops standing around, one native guy, because he wouldn't pay that 5 cents when it first come out, right? And now, so they changed that and put that into the HST. But by our inherent rights, we're totally tax-free. And I think that's the same with our neighbors here, the Three Fire Society. I think they're supposed to be totally exempt, but yet all our medicals and all our dentures are supposed to be cared for in our schoolings according to the agreements.
Right. Kubwatse, I'm curious to the relationship between the Assembly of First Nations, and from what I understand, that's the umbrella, perhaps, organization for all the indigenous groups, right? What's the connection? But anyway, the question I'm looking to get at is the Assembly of First Nations connection with the Idle No More movement.
I'm not too sure exactly what the connection is. But going back to what my brother Wes was talking about, he's the elected chiefs, right? So you have the elected chiefs that are elected from the reserves. Those chiefs, those elected chiefs, then they vote in for the Assembly of First Nations chiefs.
Okay. Right.
So the Assembly of First Nations chiefs is the chief of all the band elected chiefs. They're not hereditary chiefs, right? And so, for example, I do not agree with what the band elected chiefs are saying as a general consensus.
One of the things that you're finding out now in this Idle No More, there's 2 points. One is, as Native people throughout all of Canada, you can look at it as that one movie, I believe it was called Network. And that one actor says, "I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take this anymore." That's what's happening with us. We're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore because it's been put on us for hundreds of years and we're just mad as hell, we're not going to take it anymore. So people are rising up and it's becoming a grassroots organization. Now with the people rising up there, there's always people that want to speak for us. And that's where you have the AFN trying to usurp the grassroots by wanting to speak for us. And they do not speak for us at all.
So what are your thoughts on January 11th when Stephen Harper meets with the AFN to address the treaty rights?
It's a start. It's only a start, but I prefer that me as a Cayuga from the Cayuga Nation, I want my traditional spokespeople there. I don't want band council representing me. That's my right, you know. That's my freedom. You know what they talk about freedom. My free choice is to have what's done is right, which is the traditional people speaking on my behalf, and part of my family, which is the Turtle clans, right? The Cayuga Turtle clans. I don't see. I think it's only a start. There's going to be more meetings if they don't. Like it was said before, when Idle No More got started, the problem is not going to go away with what they created and with their own way of living and how they treated us, right? And why the people are standing up, because that's what Idle No More is about. It's a time when the people themselves get so fed up that you know, we're being tired of being stepped on, looked down upon, that things have got to change. And with that, which coincides with the Mayan prophecies, you know, like the end of the time. And now they say that 2012, from now to 2013, is that time when the higher power is going to be watching people and see how they're going to be doing. And if there is going to be a change. The 2012, a lot of people got that confused. Oh, it's the end of the world. But they forgot out as you know it, which is the proper wording of that. It is the end of the world as you know it. So which means this change which is taking place now with the people rising up. And we're not doing this just for our own races here. We're doing it for everybody. You know, when the spirits say it is for everybody, what they mean is the Six Nations people that follow that Ganyario Agoa, the great law of peace. Any nation or any person that sits under the tree of peace, and any other person or nation does not pose a threat to that great binding peace. That is everybody. Anybody else beyond that is going to be out of luck in time. You know, like we've been trying to tell them with like when Hurricane Sandy come along. That was only a warning. And as was said, those people there should really respect the Haudenosaunee, because if it was not for their people being there, it would have been a Category 10 hurricane. But we gotta have this time to learn, you know, so we all
The
can
connection between the natural world and our physical.
On that meeting that's scheduled for January 11th, in my opinion, you know, I'm looking at it from a Haudenosaunee standpoint, and I'm looking at it from the canoe. I'm not in the boat, I'm in the canoe. And looking at it from the canoe, who at the AFN, who of these elected chiefs have any of these two-row wampum belts that they can drape on their arms and bring it in to the meeting to show Harper that we have the belts? They don't have them. We have the belts. We have all the belts, and they exist within our community. We bring them out every so often.
Are you hopeful at all about the September 11th meeting? And
I'm not hopeful at all, because you do not have anybody that can hold those belts in that forum. You do not have traditional chiefs in that forum. Okay, we as Haudenosaunee people are allies to the Crown. We are the people that should be there at that meeting, and yet we're not.
You feel it's not the correct people. Guante, what are your thoughts about the future? Not just January 11th, the meeting, but in the future, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm hopeful for the future. I mean, we heard a little bit about what my brother was saying about the Mayan prophecies. Like the Anishinaabe have our own prophecies as well. And one of them, Ashkamadzig, I'm a part of our land reclamation up in Awenda Provincial Park, where we set up an Ashkamadzig unity camp. Ashkamadzig in our language refers to the new people of the seventh fire prophecy, who will pick up the many things that were left on the trail, probably beat down of us through colonization, that we're going to pick up these things, you know, our sacred bundles, which are our sacred pipes and our ceremonies and our dances and our languages, and we're going to, you know, like, choose to live, basically, because like the seventh fire basically says is that we've come to a crossroads, and that crossroads says either we continue along the way that we are right now in this capitalistic society, and we end our life here. We can no longer pollute the waters, you know, because we'll just poison ourselves and we'll die. And then the other one says that we pick up these things and we return to a natural way of life, right? And that's the two choices. And so me coming from like an optimistic standpoint, and especially with my back put against the wall, is like, you know what, I'm not going to take it no more. I'm not going to identify my way of life with something that is destroying other life. Like, you know, like for example, like our way of life affects other ways of life in indigenous peoples in other parts of the world that we don't know about, that we don't like, you know, like a cell phone, for example, has, you know, minerals in it that affect it, that's a conflict mineral in Africa, and this list goes on and on that affects everybody, right? And so anyways, like the way that I see things is that our inherent rights to me, as I understand them, are the inherent rights granted to me by the Creator and by Mother Earth. That I have a way of life that is on that earth that is, you know, migratory. I will follow the herds, and I will go and live on the land the way that I want to. That is in line and is in balance with the earth and all of other creation, right? So like when we talk about how does the AFN or how does the Band Council or how these, you know, relationships with the Crown go, I see them as an economic development opportunities that will sort of give jobs and whatever to their communities, and that's not the way that I see things that is beneficial to me, right? I see things that should be liberating our traditional land so that we can go and live that way that we want to, right?
So, which brings up a really good question I feel about the future is, do you think for positive change, good change to happen, do you think it's going to happen through these negotiations with the state or, federal government, or will it be in terms of the leadership within the First Nations groups? Like
I
think it'll be the people absent of the state. I think that's the way that it has to be.
Okay.
The way I look at it is that one of the things that I'm very interested in is having your community, your people as allies with the Haudenosaunee, because it is through allies with all of the different groups, whether they be your people, whether they be unions, whether they be NGOs. We need allies, as many allies as possible. Okay, and I'm striving to become have your people as allies, because together we can do many things. But it's the unity of our relationship that I'm looking forward to, because that's where I see many bright things coming about, is the relationship as allies and helping each other.
Yeah, I agree.
And what are your hopes for this movement? The movement is spreading. There are some demonstrations yesterday. I think some are planned for this week. In terms of educating the greater Canadian public, what are your hopes this movement will achieve?
I received a phone call from a very good friend of mine, a sister, a cousin, if you want to call her, and she was saying that there is something that's happening among these movements that needs to really be addressed, and I'll go like on record of saying it, that a lot of these people that are coming to these rallies are carrying our sacred items, our drums, our pipes, our sacred medicines, and they're not being respected in a great way. Like that, some people are showing up, with anger or like these negative attitudes. Like some people are even showing up like perhaps even drunk or under the influence of things, and these things need to be addressed, because if we're going to move forward in a good way, then we have to recognize that we're going to move this way, and that those things have no place within these circles, and those things were instilled to divide us, right? And we can't allow those things to continue to divide the people, right? So those things, I think, have to be addressed at the very forefront of things.
Okay.
So I like part of like what I'm doing with like the Ashkomazik reclamation, and also the umbrella of the Anishinaabeg Confederacy to invoke our nationhood, is that we are trying to find a way to now like use the context of the Truro Wampum, the principles of everything, but to be inclusive of everyone, right? Because if you understand the Truro Wampum, that boat, that settler boat that came, there was a hierarchical system that was in there. There was the captain and the lieutenants and the officers and the people that were forced in there as slaves, and all those workers that were under the gun to be on that boat. Okay. So we need to
recognize.
Whereas
in the canoe there was
none of that, right?
Okay.
So we need to recognize that perhaps some of those people that were on that boat, they didn't want to be under that boat, but they still follow under that settler rule. So perhaps there has to be an avenue to include other people such as yourself that have come here, escaping colonialism from your own countries, to come here and to recognize what it's like to be a part of this part of the original law of the land, if you want to call it, right?
One of the earlier...
sorry, it's time for a quick break, Wes. Dear viewers, please join us after a short break to continue this discussion. That was a very good point. Welcome back, dear viewers. Today on Crossroads, we're discussing the Idle No More movement, Chief Teresa Spence hunger strike, and some of the challenges that our First Nations face on this land. So one thing we ended the previous segment's discussion on was the connections First Nation groups and peoples have with different parts of society, particularly among new immigrant settler communities. What do you think, what connections or areas of common good exist?
One of the things I'd like to start off immediately is that within our great law, we have the oldest immigration laws in the world, the oldest immigrations, because we welcome anybody and everybody to sit underneath the tree of peace. So we have from the great tree of peace, we have 4 white roots that go out in all the directions, the 4 directions. And anybody can follow those white roots to the tree of peace and seek shelter under the tree. The only thing that we ask is that you obey the laws within the great law. Your people be welcome. It's not that you have to change anything, or because you bring in your own rules, your own beliefs, but you can join us. And in joining us, what we can offer is peace, because we come together.
Steve?
And, you know, building on this principle that Wes is talking about, you know, historically Haudenosaunee peoples have integrated many peoples who have come from elsewhere into their nation, into their confederacy. With I Don't Know More, we have this opportunity right now, I think, as we've been discussing here today, not between the government and the AFN, but for peoples here on Turtle Island to negotiate and renegotiate the relationships that we have with each other, looking to principles like the Turo Wampum to guide how we're going to relate to each other on a nation-to-nation basis. I know many immigrants, let's say in more recent history, my family included, came to Canada in this period that we know as multiculturalism, which was a period that, despite its open pretenses, you know, stated that, you know, Canada is constituted by these 2 founding nations, a French one and an Anglophone one, and these are the founding nations of Canada. And, you know, we're the indigenous people, we're the Oklahoma, the original peoples that were here on Turtle Island. They're not factored into that multicultural, you know, the way multiculturalism casts things. And so many people coming to Canada feel grateful. They're like, wow, we're very grateful that Canada has given us, you know, sanctuary or an opportunity in this, you know, great land of opportunity, not knowing that they're entering into a colonial situation. They're settling upon lands that are being stolen, actively stolen from peoples. And many people who are leaving their own lands were also peoples affected by colonialism who were leaving their situation. So picking up on something we were talking about earlier, you know, I think a lot of people would, based on what we were talking about here today, look at the structure of the Assembly of First Nations and the band councils, and they may be like, well, that seems democratic, you know, people from all the different band councils represented at the AFN. But, you know, how would Tamil people feel if they were told about their national liberation struggle, that, well, you have Tamils in the Sri Lankan government, there are Tamils in elected office in Sri Lanka. But I think the response of a lot of Tamils would be that, well, we are our own nation, and given the history of genocide, given all the blood that was spilled of Tamil people on the island and by the Sri Lankan government, we are exercising our right to national self-determination. And that's exactly what original peoples, original nations are doing right now. And I think we're seeing this all come to the fore through I Don't Know More. But of course, this, you know, people have not been idle for a long time, especially, I guess, the brothers here today have, you know, this is not the beginning. This is, you know, well, hopefully the beginning of a beautiful liberation movement that continues to develop.
And do you see this, these sort of connections, you know, we were talking earlier about the environmental, you know, coalition that's being, you know, pushing for greater environmental protection, which works with the First Nations spirit, right? Do you see these connections being made beyond these causes?
Well, if I can speak to that, you know, as I think Gibwanese had already mentioned, when many settlers came over on that boat, which is identified in the Turo Wampum, there were hierarchies and divisions within that boat. There were slaves at the very bottom of the boats. There were indentured laborers who were prisoners, who were in jail, who were sent across the sea to colonize. There were, you know, trades and craftspeople. There were settlers. There were merchants. There were the priests. There were all there was this hierarchy, and people were brought here under different pretenses and for different reasons. And many benefited from colonialism differentially to different extents and degrees, in huge terms, to the extent that we have billionaires today that are continuing to plunder the lands all across the country who are benefiting from colonialism. And then you have, I would argue, a large, you know, working class majority of people, recent immigrants, new Canadians, people who have been here much longer, who maybe are not benefiting that much from this system, and who would benefit from an entirely new relationship to the land, to the nations that were already here and continue to exist, and to all those who have come from elsewhere who may have their own cultural and national identifications, but are probably here to stay and probably want to live in peace with the land, with the environment, and with peoples who are already here. And in this time of grave economic crisis, where everybody's willing to admit, even the rulers of the system, that since 2008, capitalism is in very deep crisis. This relationship to the land that is all about exploitation and plunder, you know, they're already calculating that, well, 100 years from now, the temperature is going to be 5 degrees more. We're running out of all of these finite resources. We're already planning, you know, you have all this apocalypse and end of the world scenarios in popular culture and in mass media. Well, you know, maybe this is the end of one type of world and the beginning of a new one. And I think if that's going to be possible, it's really important that communities like the Tamil community, like Indigenous people, I'm Portuguese myself, many of the newcomers to this to Turtle Island strike up a new relationship amongst peoples in peace, harmony, coexistence, so that we all benefit together from a society that respects all nations.
Yeah.
In terms of the future, like in your various First Nations, how are the youth turning towards, you know, there's obviously with the advent of social media and all these influences, how are they staying connected to their original ancestry and roots? Is it a challenge? Every community, every society faces challenges with their youth.
The relationship is supposed to be one with elders, and you have grandparents. That relationship is family. And as long as you have that relationship, then the knowledge that, quote, the youth bring, they bring as a learning experience that they're learning all the time through the direction of the elders and information from different people within that nation. So that relationship is really spectacular, because right now you're seeing that this Idle No More movement is a lot of people in their 20s. And they are galvanizing the people. They're the ones who are texting, they're the ones who are Facebooking, they're the ones that are tweeting. And that's how the information gets out, and that's how these things happen, is by that way.
That way. Last question, go on, say. One thing I've noticed is there seems, and you were speaking to this earlier, is a connection between the spiritual beliefs of First Nations community to our own community, in the spirit of having a relationship with the land, with the people, as well as with a greater spirit that overlooks everything. Can you speak to that briefly?
The way that I understand it is that we have something called the 7 grandfather teachings. And understanding these 7 grandfather teachings, you know, it creates that avenue so that you understand everything and where you are. And I understand one of them, which is love, right? Love of the 7 grandfather teachings. And the way that I understand this is that out of the Creator's love, He created all of this. He created all of creation, the air, the water, and everything. And I am a part of this love that He created, that the Creator created. And understanding and recognizing that I am a sacred part of creation, then everything else is also a sacred part of creation. And out of that love that the Creator passed through me, I should reflect that to everyone else. And in our teachings, we had a circle, and it's got, maybe you've seen it, it's called the medicine wheel. And on those, there's 4 different directions, and there's 4 different nations. I mean, that could be expanded, and it probably should include like more like a rainbow context for all the different nations of the world. But we're all supposed to live in harmony, right? And so the way that I understand the teachings is that we are all a sacred part of creation, and we are all indigenous.
It's interesting,
to Mother Earth.
the strong similarity to, you know, the original, like some of the core beliefs of Hinduism, right, which most of us subscribe to, right? Of that connection of love and being creator and creation being intrinsic and part of each other. Dear viewers, though the reality for many of us is that we don't interact with First Nations people in our everyday life, their experiences and realities are an important and fundamental aspect of our fabric. What is happening right now and will happen in the coming months will play a critical role in how we mold and shape our identity. Thank you for tuning into TVI's Crossroads. I'm your host, Parthi Kandaval. Have a good week.
தமிழரின் பிம்பம் உங்கள் டிவி.